JasmineCrockett.com, clever, and utterly unafraid to stand her ground. Tonight, she faces a challenge that will test her wit and strength like never before. How she turns every trick against a bold opponent, proving once again why she's one of the sharpest minds in the room. The hall hummed with anticipation long before anyone stepped onto the stage. Every seat was filled, people leaning forward as if the night itself held a vital secret. This wasn't a fancy gala or a political showdown, but something in between, an open public debate meant to let voices be heard without scripts or filters. That alone made the atmosphere crackle with energy. Barron, tall and composed, walked in with the self-assured air of someone who already knew how the evening would unfold. His suit was impeccably sharp, his expression calm, and he offered the crowd a polite nod as he made his way to the front. He looked comfortable, almost too comfortable, as if he expected to take control without breaking a sweat. Across the room, Jasmine Crockett entered quietly, almost unnoticed at first. She didn't push through the crowd or seek attention. Instead, she moved with a steady, quiet confidence, taking her seat as if the weight of the room didn't faze her in the slightest. But those who recognized her knew one thing. Jasmine was not someone you could rattle easily. For several minutes, the event unfolded smoothly. People asked questions, offered thoughts, and the host welcomed each voice. Yet beneath this ordinary rhythm, a subtle tension was building, an undercurrent only a few could sense. Barron kept glancing in Jasmine's direction, studying her with a faint smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Then the moment came. The host opened the floor again, inviting anyone to share their perspective on identity, respect, and public responsibility. Barron moved first, rising smoothly, as if he'd been waiting for this exact invitation. He walked toward the center of the stage with a confidence that immediately captured the audience's attention. His height, his calm movements, everything about him naturally drew eyes. He began speaking about public behavior and how people should present themselves. At first, his words sounded neutral, nothing unusual or sharp. People nodded, listening politely, but then his tone shifted subtly. It wasn't loud or dramatic. It was quiet enough that only those paying close attention caught the change. He turned toward Jasmine, not fully, but just enough that everyone knew she was his target. "With all the discussions we have about where people come from," he said smoothly, "it's interesting how some people claim one thing when their appearance suggests. They may have a heritage they don't talk about." The room paused. Wasn't a direct insult, but it was pointed. Too pointed. Barron didn't stop. "I've always believed people should be honest about their roots," he added with a seemingly innocent smile. "Sometimes you can just see things others try to hide." People shifted in their seats. Some looked at Jasmine. Others looked at Barron with a flash of discomfort. Everyone knew what he was hinting at without him saying it outright. It was a veiled jab at her skin color, an indirect comment dressed as casual observation delivered lightly enough to be denied, yet sharp enough to wound. Jasmine didn't react. Not a flinch, not a raised eyebrow, nothing. She simply watched him. Her stillness made the moment even more intense. Barron expected at least a small reaction, surprise, irritation, anything. But her calm expression remained frozen in place, as if his words hadn't reached her at all. And somehow that calm shook the room more than any angry reply could have. The audience felt the tension thickening. A few people whispered to their neighbors. Some stared at Barron with disbelief, while others shifted uncomfortably, unsure how to process what they had just heard. The host glanced nervously between the two, sensing the spark that had just been thrown into the open. Barron, however, seemed satisfied with himself. He gave a slow, almost relaxed shrug, as if he had simply made an ordinary comment. Yet his eyes flicked toward Jasmine again, waiting for her to break, to show even a small crack in her composure. But Jasmine continued to sit still, her hands folded neatly, her eyes steady and calm. Her silence felt louder than any microphone in the room. After a few moments, Barron stepped back slightly, giving the floor to the next speaker, though he kept watching Jasmine, expecting something, anything. But she remained quiet. Her silence wasn't fear or defeat. It was something else entirely. Was the silence of someone choosing her moment with care. People could feel it. Something in her stillness told the room that her turn whenever it came would matter. And so the tension lingered, suspended in the air like a held breath. Barron stood there wearing the faint smile of someone who believed he had come out. Ahead. The audience waited, wondering if Jasmine had accepted the jab or if she was planning something. Little did Barron know, the calm he was so proud of would not last. The silence he mistook for hesitation was the exact opposite. Jasmine wasn't shaken. She was ready. She was simply waiting for the right moment to speak, a moment that would shift the entire room. The air felt different after Barron finished speaking. It wasn't loud tension. It was the kind that slips into a room quietly and then refuses to leave. People kept glancing between him and Jasmine, wondering if she was going to answer his indirect jab or if she would let it pass. Her silence made everyone more curious, almost nervous. Barron stood there with an easy smile, the kind of smile someone wears when they believe they've already won. He looked like a person who had just made a clever move in a game and was waiting to see the other players struggle to catch up. Some in the crowd watched him with admiration, while others waited uneasily for what might come next. But Jasmine remained as steady as a mountain. She didn't shift. She didn't sigh. She didn't show even the smallest bit of irritation. She simply sat with her hands resting together. Her eyes focused straight ahead, not even blinking more than usual. Her calmness confused Barron. He had expected at least some hint that his comment had landed. Maybe a frown, a sharp breath, or a subtle shake of the head, but she gave him nothing at all. Absolutely nothing. That silence, her silence, began to work against him. He cleared his throat and tried to continue. "I think what I said needed to be said," he added lightly, as if he were trying to convince someone, though no one knew if he meant the audience or himself. People get too sensitive. These days it's important to speak openly again. The crowd shifted, could sense he was trying to keep control, but the room wasn't reacting the way he expected. Instead of agreeing, people seemed to be waiting, almost holding back because Jasmine still hadn't responded, and somehow that made her presence stronger than his words. Aaron glanced at her again. She didn't look hurt. She didn't look angry. She simply looked prepared. The host tried to smooth things over by directing the conversation elsewhere, but the moment had already taken root in everyone's minds. The pause after Barron's comment felt like an arrow hanging in the air, waiting to drop, and the person holding the bow hadn't even moved yet. After a few more minutes, Jasmine finally lifted her head slightly and looked directly at Barron. The room hushed instantly, almost as if they all shared one breath. Barron seemed to stiffen, though he tried to hide it by straightening his jacket and offering her a polite nod, but Jasmine didn't nod back. She continued watching him with calm, thoughtful eyes. Then slowly, she rose from her seat. She didn't rush. She didn't jerk her movements or try to make a grand show. Yet the way she stood made the whole room feel like the next moment would matter. Barron's smile faded just a little, the corners of his mouth tightening. Jasmine adjusted her sleeve, still calm, still silent. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady and clear, but there was something underneath it, something controlled, sharp, and intentional. "You're wondering why I've been quiet?" she said. She didn't ask. She stated it like she already knew exactly what he'd been thinking. The audience leaned closer. Barron blinked as if her words had hit him before he even understood what they meant. Jasmine continued, "I stayed quiet because I wanted you to finish." Her tone wasn't soft, but it wasn't harsh either. Important information and choosing her moment with care. People exchanged looks. Some had already sensed that her silence wasn't passive. It was purposeful. Barron opened his mouth, maybe to interrupt, but Jasmine lifted her hand slightly, not to silence him rudely, but to show she wasn't done speaking. Something in that small gesture made him freeze in place. She said, "You spoke with confidence. You made your point, and you believe you've shaken me." Her words were measured, each one placed carefully. Barron swallowed, unsure where she was leading. "But I didn't remain quiet because I was bothered," she said. "I remained quiet because before I answer you, I want to share something of my own." Crowd reacted quietly, a gasp here, a whisper there. But Jasmine didn't acknowledge the noise. She reached into her bag and brought out a folder crisp and sealed. The room's attention tightened instantly as though everyone had been pulled by the same invisible thread. Barron's expression changed. His eyes narrowed slightly, then widened. He glanced at the folder as if it held something dangerous. Jasmine held it in her hand as if it weighed more than paper. "This isn't something I planned to reveal today," she said. "I brought it only in case someone pushed me to a place I don't like going." The implication was clear, and it landed heavily. Barron shifted on his feet. His confidence, once smooth and effortless, now seemed forced. His fingers twitched slightly, betraying nerves he didn't want anyone to see. Jasmine looked him straight in the eye, not with anger or pride, but with the calm certainty of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. "You wanted to talk about identity," she said. "So, let's talk about it fully." The energy in the room thickened. Every person locked onto the two of them. Barron swallowed again, realizing too late that Jasmine's silence had never been a sign of defeat. It was a warning, a quiet signal that the moment she chose to speak, everything would change. And that moment had just arrived. The entire hall seemed to freeze as Jasmine held the sealed folder. It looked ordinary, just a thin stack of papers inside a plain cover. The way the room reacted made it feel heavier than steel. Even people in the back row sat completely still, their eyes locked on that folder like it contained something that would shift the ground beneath them. Barron's earlier confidence faded the longer Jasmine stood there without rushing. He had been so sure of himself, so certain he had the upper hand. But now he watched her with unease creeping into his face like he suddenly realized she had been playing a different game than the one he thought he'd started. Jasmine slowly opened the folder. She didn't rush and she didn't show any excitement. Her expression remained calm, almost too calm for the moment. The soft rustle of the papers made several people in the audience flinch as though the sound itself carried a warning. She lifted the first page and held it carefully. The paper wasn't flashy, just structured lines, numbers, and official-looking markings. But its plain appearance only made people more curious. Jasmine looked at Barron and said, "Before you spoke earlier, I had no reason to bring this out. I hoped I wouldn't need to." Her voice was clear, steady, almost gentle, but her words carried weight, the kind that didn't need volume to land hard. Barron clenched his jaw, trying to look unaffected, but the tension around his eyes gave him away. Jasmine continued, "I knew that if anyone tried to make assumptions about me, about my background, my skin, my heritage, I needed to be ready. Not because I'm unsure of who I am, but because some people use identity to cut others down." The audience shifted again. A ripple of agreement passed through the room, mixed with suspense. Barron's earlier jab now felt small compared to whatever Jasmine was building toward. She looked at the page again. "I hired a private investigator months ago, someone who works with ancestry records, genetic mapping, and long-term lineage studies. It wasn't cheap, wasn't simple, and it took far more time than anyone expected." The crowd leaned closer, drawn deeper into the tension. Aaron swallowed hard. For the first time, he didn't look ready with a quick remark or a clever grin. His posture stiffened like his body was bracing for something he didn't want to hear. Jasmine took a slow breath. "I didn't do this out of curiosity. I didn't do this to attack anyone. I did this because when people throw personal insults, they usually hope the person being hit has nothing to throw back." She lifted her gaze and spoke. "With a quiet kind of strength, I came prepared." Barron flinched visibly, though he tried to hide it by adjusting his sleeves. Jasmine held the page up just enough for the audience to see the top line, though the words were too small for anyone to read from a distance. What mattered wasn't the text, it was her next sentence. "These papers confirmed something unexpected. She said something that changes the story you've been telling about yourself for years." People inhaled sharply. Room grew so silent that even the lights seemed to hum louder. Barron stammered, "What? What are you implying?" Jasmine didn't blink. "I'm not implying anything." Reading what is written, Barron's breath caught. His face drained of color. She lowered the page slightly and said the words that hit the room like a shockwave. "These reports show that Melania is not your biological mother." Gasps scattered across the hall. The woman near the front pressed her hand to her chest. A man seated on the aisle leaned forward as if he needed to be sure he heard correctly. Even the host, who had been trying so hard to remain neutral, couldn't hide the stunned look spreading across his face. Barron's mouth opened, but no sound came out. His eyes widened in disbelief, flickering between Jasmine and the paper she held. Jasmine didn't gloat. She didn't smirk. She spoke with quiet certainty. "I won't repeat everything written in these documents," she said, "but I will tell you this. The report is verified. The tests were performed through a confidential database that specializes in deep ancestral identification. The process required multiple checks, cross-matching, and confirmation from a specialist." Barron took a shaky step back. His hands trembled. Jasmine continued, "I didn't expect to find anything like this, but when you rely on loud comments and thin insults to define someone else, Sometimes the truth you've been avoiding comes to the surface. Barron finally found his voice, but it was thin, almost broken. This is fake. This is wrong. His words crumbled as soon as they left his mouth. He didn't sound confident. He didn't sound angry. Sounded lost. Jasmine gently placed the papers back into the folder. You don't have to accept what's written here tonight. But before you try to question my identity again, you should know that your own story is not as simple as you pretend it is. The audience fell into total silence. No one dared move, closed the folder, and held it at her side. And with that, the shock in the room turned into something deeper. The understanding that this moment was not just an argument, it was the turning point. The room was quiet, but it was a heavy quiet, the kind that presses on your chest. Barron stood frozen, staring at the folder in Jasmine's hand, at the paper she had just revealed, and at the audience whose eyes now weighed on him like stones. He had walked into this debate confident, thinking he had control, thinking his sly comment about Jasmine's background would rattle her. But now every bit of that confidence seemed to crumble under the weight of what had just been revealed. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words stuck. He tried again. That can't be true. His voice broke low and shaky, like someone trying to hold onto a rope that had already slipped through their fingers. His hands fidgeted at his sides, gripping the edge of the table for stability. Even his usual calm demeanor, the one that made him seem unshakable, had dissolved into a visible tremor. Jasmine didn't respond right away. She didn't need to. The moment itself was already doing the work for her stutter, the hesitation. Everything in him betrayed the certainty he had carried in just moments before. He had tried to assert dominance with a few words, a subtle hint, a smile meant to unsettle her. Now the room had reversed. He was the one caught off guard, exposed, unarmed. Finally, Jasmine spoke softly but with precision. Before you try to attack someone else's identity, you should understand your own. The words struck Barron like a hammer. They were not just a retort, were a mirror. He realized with a growing sense of panic that the very weapon he had tried to use against her, the veiled comment on heritage and identity, had boomeranged, and it had landed squarely on him. He tried to regain control to speak, but the sentences tangled in his mouth. I didn't mean ... it's not you. His words were incoherent, faltering. The audience watched in intense fascination as the confident figure of Barron would walked in with the air of a young man who could challenge anyone shrank visibly before them. Jasmine took a slow step forward, her voice calm but firm. First, she said, find your real mother before you attack mine. The effect was instantaneous. A murmur ran through the audience, followed by stunned silence. Her words were more than just a clever comeback. They highlighted the irony of the situation in a way that no one could ignore. Barron had tried to undermine her by making a subtle personal attack. Jasmine had countered with a revelation so personal, so unassailable that it rendered his attempt meaningless. She had not only defended herself, but she had also exposed the fragility of his own position. Barron's face went pale. His usual smirk was gone, replaced by an expression of disbelief and panic. He opened his mouth, closed it, and tried again, each attempt weaker than the last. He had walked into a debate believing he could outsmart someone with words, but the words he had relied on were now useless. He realized that intelligence, confidence, and preparation weren't just about clever remarks. They were about understanding what you were dealing with and respecting the weight of the truth. The audience, sensing the shift, leaned forward as if to catch every detail of what was happening. It wasn't just the revelation itself that was shocking. It was how Jasmine handled it. She didn't shout. She didn't gloat, and she didn't mock. Her strength was in her calmness and her careful choice of words and the timing of her delivery. She had taken control of the room without raising her voice, without force, simply through precision and clarity. Barron, on the other hand, was unraveling. His gestures were erratic, his voice weak, his confidence evaporated. A young man who had tried to assert dominance through implication and subtle attack now seemed completely exposed. Vulnerable in a way the audience had never seen before. Every attempted word seemed to make his situation worse. Each stumble in his speech further cemented the reversal of power. Jasmine continued, letting the silence stretch for just a moment before adding, identity is personal. It is not a weapon. And when someone tries to use it to diminish another person, it often reveals more about themselves than about anyone else. The words hung in the air. Barron opened his mouth again, but the courage to speak had left him. He looked down at the floor, at the folder in Jasmine's hands, at the papers he knew he couldn't refute. The audience could see it all. The shift in power, the collapse of arrogance, the exposure of vulnerability. He had come in thinking he would, unsettle Jasmine Crockett with a sly remark. Instead, he had been completely undone by her calm, meticulous preparation. She had taken something he thought was his strength, her identity, and turned it into a force that revealed his own weakness. The irony was impossible to miss. Finally, Barron stepped back, defeated not by shouting or confrontation, but by the quiet, undeniable authority of truth. He realized in a moment of clarity tinged with panic that being clever isn't about landing a single jab. It's about understanding the consequences of words. It's about respecting the reality of people's lives and about facing truths you might not want to see. Jasmine didn't celebrate. She didn't need to. She simply folded the papers neatly and held them at her side, her composure unchanged. Barron's downfall was complete, not because she had been cruel, but because she had been prepared, confident, and precise. The room seemed to exhale collectively. The tension shifted from shock to understanding. Barron had entered, thinking he was the one in control. Now everyone could see clearly that Jasmine had mastered the moment completely, using calm intelligence, in careful timing to turn the situation around. Barron's stuttered attempts to respond. His visible unease and the complete reversal of power had transformed a small personal jab into a lesson that resonated far beyond the two of them. The audience didn't just witness a confrontation. They witnessed a dramatic shift in understanding. A clear example of how underestimating someone else, especially when attacking their identity, can backfire entirely. And in that moment, Barron knew he had been outsmarted completely. The event ended not with applause, but with a quiet that was heavier than any cheer could have been. People sat for a few moments longer than usual, letting the weight of what had just happened settle over them. It wasn't just a debate anymore, had become a lesson, one that reached beyond personal jabs, politics, or who could speak louder. It was about understanding, respect, and the consequences of underestimating others. Barron left the stage slowly, still pale and shaken. He avoided meeting anyone's eyes. The confidence he had carried in with him entirely gone. He had expected to be the one in control, to challenge Jasmine with a sly remark, and perhaps even to appear clever in front of the audience. But he had miscalculated. Every subtle jab he had prepared, every smirk, every carefully chosen word had been turned back on him. The power he had assumed he possessed evaporated in an instant, replaced by a kind of clarity he hadn't anticipated. Jasmine, in contrast, walked off the stage composed, calm, and assured. Her words had landed perfectly, but she had not needed to raise her voice or belittle anyone. In a world where personal identity is often weaponized, we find ourselves entwined in the complexities of family and heritage. Who truly outsmarted the other today? Was it the sharp jab unmasked by a deeper truth? Or was it the silent strength in embracing one's identity? What do you think?